Hi, my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we talk about the best ideas in marketing. And my guest today is Ritu Kaul, the CMO of Calance, a technology firm that provides innovative IT solutions to businesses. Ritu has deep experience in strategic marketing, brand leadership, and driving business growth. She's worked across a variety of industries, including retail, technology, food and beverage, and even consumer packaged goods. Ritu, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here, David.
I noticed that earlier in your career, you worked in marketing on brands like Coca-Cola and Domino's Pizza, and I just wondered if you got all the Coke and pizza that you could ever want.
I got more than my fair share of Coke and pizza, to be very frank. There were friends of mine who would say that we envy, the companies you work for. But it was exciting. It was exciting to work for brands where, you enjoyed their products too. So you were a consumer, and that always is very, very helpful.
That's great. Well, I'm sure you learned a lot through that, but you worked for many other companies too, and I'm excited about you sharing some of your experience with our audience. The topic that you and I have been talking about is around CEOs and CEOs, how CEOs enter an organization. And the idea that we've been talking about is really the question about how CMOs, I'm sorry, CMOs can quickly make an impact when they join a new organization. How do you feel that they can make the fastest impact when they join an organization, or how has that worked in your experience?
Right. So, in my experience, I have worked across industries. I have also worked across geographies. I have worked in emerging markets, India, China, and I worked in the United States. One of the things that is unique to me or people like me, I would say, is just by the sheer amount of experience we have in different situations, industries, geographies, and contexts. We're able to deep dive into new industries, connect the dots fairly fast. But having said that, your question was, how do CMOs make an impact in a company? I would say, first of all, look at a company where you feel you're bringing transferable skills, whether that's understanding a product, whether that's understanding the journey that the company is having, the scale it is at today, and the scale it wants to reach in the coming future, and see if your skill sets are a match for that, because that's actually the greatest way that you can make a contribution as a CMO, where 80% of your job is not a learning curve in a new industry or a scale, but understanding what are the business problems and challenges that industry has faced, having done that, having driven outcomes somewhere else. And I would say industry doesn't matter. If the challenge is typical, then you're able to actually guide the company in terms of looking at the problem strategically. And one of my favorite terms is, you have to look inside the box and outside the box as well. Because many times what happens in companies is, especially when they're faced with a growth challenge, is that, they've saturated all avenues. All of us look at our data very, very closely and market research. And so you're looking at, customer patterns, sales data, sales cycle, preferences, all of those things. And sometimes you feel that, you've executed all the ideas or you've identified opportunity gaps. The role of a CMO really is to bring both outside and inside thinking. And what I mean by that is, could you look at, the problem from two angles? One is when you're outside the box, you step back from the situation and you say, hey, listen, if I was a consumer, would I buy from this brand? Under what circumstances would I buy from this brand? Or you might come to a conclusion that I will never buy from this brand. So a person like me or a customer segment like me is not relevant. Secondly, you actually are able to appreciate the life stage cycle where the consumer is in terms of their problem and look at how to meet them there. I can take you through two examples very quickly. I actually worked with Speedo in an emerging market. It was already a brand leader, but it was facing stagnation in terms of its growth and store footfalls. And when I deep dived into the situation, obviously I looked at the sales data. I operated from the shop floor. I talked to customers. I talked to the store managers and operators. But one of the things I figured while I was on that journey was that swimming itself is a niche market, right? It's focused only on people who are swimmers. It could be seasonal in many countries, and it is limited by the infrastructure you have in a country of the number of facilities which offer a swimming pool, right? The second aspect is, and it helped because I'm a fitness enthusiast and I'm a swimmer myself, is that once you buy a merchandise like a swimsuit and apparel from, a swimwear brand like Speedo, chances are you're going to look at another swimsuit in like 3 years' time. So there goes your repeat purchase cycle. So, even though you have a wide customer base, you're not able to incentivize it for a repeat purchase. So my recommendation to the brand, to the company was that you have to take share from an adjacent market. And in this case, the adjacent market is the wider fitness market. And not just the fitness market, the runners market. And what I meant by that is that running has been a growing trend last 10, 15 years throughout the world. You see people now, especially traveling for these global marathons, and I said, if you need to take share from a growing market like runners, what can you do? One is that we need to reposition ourselves and change the narrative that we are not a swimming brand, but we're a fitness brand. Speedo is equal to fitness. And then at the tactical level, what we need to do is we need to talk about how swimming can enhance your performance while running. So we actually initiated and conceptualized programs called Speedo Aquafit, which were actually designed for runners. If you were in the pool 2 times a week and you were on that program, it is going to make a transformative impact to your performance when you are running, because swimming is like as has its own benefits. And we actually got we got celebrities to come in and do that, people who were in athletic fields and stuff like that. So we also kind of made sure that it was a visible brand campaign. So that's an example of how do you make an impact? How do you connect the dots? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. What a powerful story. If you're joining as a CMO in an organization, it strikes me that there's this tension between the strategic, like that's a strategic way of thinking about the markets, about the brands, product development, new adjacent markets that you're going after that can have a massive impact. And then there's the tactical, right? There's the tactical, like who's on the team, what are we executing, how are we allocating our budgets? How, if you think about that first 90 days, right? And I love what you said too about your experience allows you to kind of connect the dots faster, right? How do you balance the strategic and the tactical as you're trying to make a short-term impact on the organization?
Right. Great question, David. So while the strategic is important, the daily sales is important too. So one of the things that, I would recommend and definitely I do is to quickly get into where the company is at now and what are its greatest challenges now. Uh, because the strategic inputs can look at long-term growth, which can come in like 2 to 3 years. Uh, but what can we do today which can enhance our revenue, our sales, our customer acquisition? One of the things that do is go very deep into the data when I join in. I like to operate from the floor. This is my favorite term, operating from the ground. So go out with sales teams and make the sales calls. Be on the retail shop floor and, sort of operate from there. When I was in Domino's Pizza, I would don a cap and work out of stores because the greatest moments of truth happen there. And many times you actually, if you try and see what happens between marketing, sales, product, and operations, is that if it is not a very cohesive setup, then one part doesn't understand the challenges of the other part. So as I come in marketing, I can have the fanciest ideas and I can do a campaigns which I think can help acquire new customers. But if operationally there are challenges on the ground, that's not going to be effective. So I think it's a mix of looking at where the company is today, what efficiency are they working with today, and can you value add there? Secondly, look at the teams that you have today. Are there gaps in the team? Do you want to get specialists in? How do you look at strengthening the current team? The solution is not always, hire people from outside as soon as you come in. Like, how do you help a team grow? How do you show them the vision? How do you identify where, there are training opportunities and you could help the current team to grow and kind of come on that vision together?
Yeah, it strikes me you've got to really do a good job with all of that, right? So, and I was going to joke that
Yes.
the solution is usually to hire a new agency so you can help with specialized skills, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I'm sure that that's part of the assessment that you're doing all the way along. I wanted to dive into one thing you said, which I really like what you said about really understanding what's happening on the ground, right? If you're in a B2B organization, you're going on sales calls. If you're a B2C organization, you might be in the store, in the warehouse. You're kind of really understanding, you're listening to calls, right? How much should the CMO be doing that versus delegating that research to a research firm who's going to be giving them a report or delegating it to their teams who's going to give them an analysis and coming back? How much do you get, your hands dirty and kind of get in there versus system because you can't only you learn it firsthand, but you only learn so much, right? Versus doing a deeper, wider analysis and delegating it to other experts on your team.
I think both are important. I wouldn't say that do one and not do the other. Getting experts in terms of consumer research is something that I have done in most companies that I have been there. And when I talk about operating from the ground floor, it's important getting your hands dirty because otherwise it's a theoretical exercise. I feel you look at a research report, you look at some Excel sheets, you look at where the data is going. I am a big one for data with intuition and having on hands experience. In fact, many companies I have worked for, I have realized where CEOs and CMOs are actually doing a lot of market visits or meeting their customers directly are where, I found impactful strategies coming out of the, management think tank and understanding of their inherent strengths and how those can be executed to drive the outcomes. But that cannot happen when you don't have a market research study because that gives you a wider perspective of the trends in the market, how to look at future, and how the competition is doing. So both are equally important, I would say.
So you leverage the trends and the data, but then getting your hands dirty. And it feels like I'm just coming back to your early comments about your experience and being able to connect the dots. When you have all the experience, you can see things on the floor or in the sales call more quickly, I imagine, because you're bringing all that to bear, and then you can use that to create strategic insights that help you go forward. So you're thinking about like the operational things that you got to work on now. You're thinking about the strategy. They're going to make an impact later on. Talk to me about, in those first 90 days, talk to me about C-level relationships. How do you create,
Yes.
alignment? How do you manage up to the CEO? How do you relate to the board? How do you think about those senior relationships? There's obviously doing your job and making the marketing function work, but there's also managing the rest of the organization in those relationships. How do you make the greatest impact in that area quickly?
That's a great question and an important point. Stakeholder management, I think, is critical for any CMO because marketing is not one department reporting to one person today. Everybody has a viewpoint, everybody is a consumer, and everybody has experience, I would say, right? So the job of a CMO is to look at, first of all, do you have representation from the C-suite in terms of their perspectives on the company and the challenges? Many times in the new outfits or new companies that I have joined, usually there are very diverse viewpoints on the same challenges. Sometimes people point me to different challenges as well. So I don't hear a unified voice many times. And it's helpful for two reasons. It helps me to quickly understand the breadth and the depth of the situation, but it also helps me understand at the end of the day, when you're devising a strategy for a company, we're all one team. Are you taking into account the perspectives of different stakeholders? Because somebody in supply chain might have a very different perspective and concern versus somebody else who's on the finance team versus somebody who's in the operations team. So it is very helpful. Second thing I would say is to build trust. I think it's extremely, extremely important to build trust. Do they see you as somebody who they can trust? Do they see you as somebody who has, enough, I wouldn't call it experience, but enough knowledge about their industry? And many times I have been told this by the C-suite and by CEO especially that, within 30 days, you know as much about our industry and company as we've done in 10 years. So it requires that kind of due diligence and understanding and, making the right point. Sometimes, going where nobody else has gone before. I have been into stores where I have seen small things like visitors comment book, which perhaps nobody sees. And there have been insights which have come out from there, and those were stores that the company was thinking of shutting down. And it talked about inventory management issues, people not finding their sizes, for example. So, there is, when you bring in nuggets like that, it's a very small example. Do they see you as an expert? Do they trust you? Are you taking into account their concerns, their viewpoints, their perspectives? So that's how I operate, and that's been very, very helpful in my journey.
Yeah, I love that. So you're building trust, you're taking their ideas into account so that you can build that alignment across the board. Easier said than done. One of the things I've seen is in my experience is that many times other C-suite executives feel like they can be experts in marketing. Marketing executives seldom feel like they can be an expert in finance or in supply chain management or in manufacturing or in whatever, human resources. But other executives often have an opinion about what should be best done in marketing. How do you build all of that consensus or input into a cohesive strategy, making people feel heard, but yet establishing yourself as the expert, as the owner, as the responsible executive managing that function?
I think there I would say data speaks the loudest,
Hmm.
because it's not my opinion against somebody else or some two people's point of view. Once you take point of views, you understand the depth and breadth of the challenge, I would say. You understand perspectives. But how you bring everybody together is through a very, non-biased approach, I would say. You present data in terms of your shop floor experiences, sales data and trends, market research. Many times it requires actually professionally conducted SWOT analysis, right? Where are the strengths? Where are the opportunities? Where are the threats? And that's something that is not built up by one or two people's opinions. You are taking various stakeholders, you're applying a very scientific process. I have taken customers, I have taken C-suite. I take employees. I go to the shop floor, and in the SWOT we'll put their voice and opinions as well, and I will mix it with some bit of data as well. And then it's not something which then sort of speaks like, oh, but this is not what I thought, or this is not how I wanted to move, because now it's very, very open, transparent, and data backed. The starting point was the perspectives and the challenge. The approach was the data, and the outcome has to come out of the data.
Hmm.
And then it's important to build consensus, actually. And that's where sometimes there are conflicts. And that's actually something that is, I would say, that comes with experience. And that's where I think the trust, the relationship management really plays a big role.
Yeah.
Trust with the person who's advising, I think it plays a big role.
Yeah, that's super important. I'm really glad you talked about data. So, you know, let's think about like those first 90 days, you're coming in as a new CMO in the organization. What is the data that is most important for that CMO to get his or her arms around really in the first 90 days? What do you have to make sure is right? And, in your experience, like what's the most difficult data to make sure that is right?
Yeah, I think at a data level, obviously the revenue data, the product mix, those usual numbers are important in terms of yearly, monthly sales growths. Customer data is very, very important. Looking at segments of, how the companies, looking at patterns. Many times I have found, I've worked with both large companies and mid-tier companies. So large companies have got their act very tightly together around data, but sometimes in mid-tier companies, it's an evolving process. And there where I find most challenges coming from, the customer data and the segmentation of data. So ideal customer profiles sometimes, how granular you're with it, how tightly your value proposition is fitting in with their pain points. And sometimes in our challenge to grow, you're trying to sometimes sell everything to every segment, and that really doesn't work. And that's where the growth stagnates many times, I feel. That's the data I have found sometimes more complex to figure out. What are the customer segments which are, a sweet spot for a company, for instance? I mean, you'll have all the sales data around it, but sometimes it's not in a manner where it's analyzed or it has those patterns. And I think subsegment, and many times I have seen, for example, in my current company, we are very strong in auto segment, auto and manufacturing. But I have been able to actually drill down and say, create 7 or 8 more subsegments in auto and manufacturing. And now we have product solutions and value propositions for each of those segments. Versus when I came in, we were targeting just another industry with our solutions or just a manufacturing industry. And think about these industries, there are wide industries. You have chemical manufacturing to auto manufacturing. In auto industry, you have car dealers, you have equipment manufacturers, like, some of our customers are farm equipment manufacturers. You have dealerships, you have auto parts suppliers. So the thing is that that's the data I find very difficult to find in the first go, but that's sometimes key to unlocking the next level of growth in a company.
And then really getting your arms around that. The last area I want to ask you about is the team. How do you build alignment within, the marketing organization or build the organization that you really want? Sometimes when you're coming in, you may find, wow, we've got the amazing team in all areas. Everybody's an expert at everything I need. And other times you may find that you don't have that, right? Or you don't have the partners, you don't have the agency, you don't have the team members. How do you build or shift, pivot the team to where it needs to be? What are those management skills or those management practices that have benefited you in the past that have helped you kind of build the team you need?
So I think assessment is important of both what one wants to achieve through marketing to lead to marketing led growth for the business, and it might be shifting gears. And if it's so, then many times the current team might not suffice, as an example.
Hmm.
The second is to genuinely, when you come in to assess, where is the team at? What are the skill sets? What are their aspirations? What they think about the company, et cetera, et cetera. And many times I have found the need to both coach the current team, but also get in new players. Now, getting in new players might not be fast enough in 90 days. What I have done in those cases when I have needed experts is to either look at agencies, so you outsource your team for the time being, but
Mhm.
you quickly get an expert, or you get consultants, because the idea is not to wait for the right team members to join in 4 or 5 months. You want to put your ideas to test. You want experts on the team. You also want to create impact through results. And while you know that growing the team is important, but that could be a 6 to 8 months kind of timeline when you want to really get the right people to come in. But actually getting in, the idea is to get in experts, whether that's an agency or a consultant. That's what I've looked at in the past when I've been in these organizations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and can be challenging to put all that together. We've just got a few minutes left, or two, and you've talked about a lot of things to do for the CMO in those first 90 days. You talked about strategy. You've talked about getting your hands dirty, really on the ground, figuring out what's going on. You talked about the team. You talked about stakeholders. You talked about C-suite alignment, data, systems, all of that stuff. If you had to do one thing, and I know this is a stupid question, but if you had to do one thing, what's the most important thing for the CMO to focus on? You're going to do all those things because you're an expert and you've done this before. You're going to work on all of that. But if you had to give advice to a new CMO coming into that role, what's the one thing that he or she needs to do above all?
So CMO needs to be a growth partner of the CEO.
Hmm.
And the one thing that they need to focus on is what's the CEO's immediate challenge, what they are trying to accomplish, and how can marketing enable that. So
Uh,
that's the single most important thing I would focus on first.
I love that. The growth partner for the CEO, because you've got to take his or her vision and make it happen, right? And if you fail at that piece, then all the rest of it will fall apart, right? You need that support. That comes from, the trust relationship that you talked about, comes from making sure that you're in alignment and you're helping that person accomplish their goals. Wow. That's super powerful. Well, thank you for this conversation. That's been really powerful and enlightening that you've done this many times. You've helped organizations grow significant ways. If one of our listeners wants to reach out to you and have a deeper conversation about any of this, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. Anybody who writes to me, I respond fairly quickly. So that's the best place to connect with me.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining the conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me.